Welcome to r/slash Prorevenge, where OP uncovers massive fraud. Our next Reddit post is from Sean NJ. So, I serve as an EMT in my community, and I've been at this particular department for the past 10 years. I currently serve as its first lieutenant. Now, the next rank up is deputy chief. This is something I'd been working towards for years. Years of training and experience brought me to the point where I was eligible for this rank. Not only that, but I'm also coming up to a military review board hearing where my community service is going to be a factor in if I'm approved in upgrading my status and being eligible for ROTC and re-entering the military. Holding the rank of deputy chief would certainly be a plus to this board. So, the current chief and deputy chief happen to be married. This past year, the deputy chief had back surgery. It's been discussed that, due to this, she probably shouldn't continue on in her position. She would abstain from real action for 2018, and she would allow me to take her place. If she doesn't run, I'm literally the only other person qualified to hold that position, apart from the chief. Her and I have discussed this at length, and she's very aware of how important this is to me. Finally, we come to the elections, and I suppose you can guess where this is going. After almost a year of planning, discussing, and promising, at the last minute, she's nominated by her husband, accepts the nomination, and is elected. She beat me by only a few votes. I sat there fuming. The chief and deputy chief wouldn't even look at me. They had screwed me. I was going to get them back. So, I started looking for dirt. After about a month, I found my smoking gun. I'll save you the long, boring story of how I came to find this information, but I will say that I looked through a great many call reports and talked to the right people. Remember when I mentioned the deputy chief had surgery? Well, she was on disability from her paid job at the telecom company for several months. Also, since she was collecting disability there, she couldn't ride the squad. Well, I found reports where her name was present, over and over. But the strange thing was, some reports had her signature as I know it, and on other documents, they were clearly forged. Where I live, in order for an ambulance call to be billable to insurance, the ambulance needs to be staffed by 2 EMTs. You can still roll an ambulance without 2 EMTs, you just can't bill insurance for it. I investigated this, and I learned the chief had been signing his wife's signature on calls that he took with only 1 EMT. That way, it appeared that 2 had been there. However, the dates coincided with when she was still in recovery, physically unable to be there. Additionally, I learned that while she was still recovering, she did take a number of calls while still collecting disability from her desk job at the telecom company. Not only was her husband, the chief, committing insurance fraud by billing insurance by forging her signature, she also was committing disability fraud. There was evidence for days. I had what I needed. The revenge. I met with the department attorney and presented my evidence. Together, we contacted the State Department of Health, who governs our ability to bill. We contacted our billing company, and we contacted the deputy chief's employer, the telecom company. Both the chief and the deputy chief's EMT certifications have been suspended pending outcome to the DOH's investigation. I'm told that one or both of them will have their certifications revoked. The deputy chief has been terminated from her job for defrauding the company on disability. The deputy chief has to pay back every single dime that she collected from disability. They've also been terminated from our department. This has also resulted in my promotion to acting chief until a special election next month. And during that election, I'm the only one qualified to run for chief. The dominoes are still falling, and they're both looking at criminal charges. The fraud amounted to over $40,000 worth of billing to insurance companies. Her disability paid her over $60,000. I do feel a little bit bad, but at the end of the day, no one forced him to commit fraud. Down in the comments, someone asked OP if they ever apologized for what they did, and OP replies, "Not at all." They didn't offer any explanation, and afterwards, I really stopped talking to them after the election, and they didn't reach out. We were actually pretty friendly too. They would just call me to shoot the breeze, grab dinner, whatever. Then, nothing. I don't know what they were looking to gain by it. She was physically unable to do the job, but who knows. They were livid when they found out that they were getting fired. They tried claiming that we didn't have enough evidence, that they'd been selflessly serving for years, that they couldn't do this to them. It might have been denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Okay, I think I have a sense for what's going on here. These people have like a hero complex where they see themselves as the good guys. So if they like skim a little off the top and give themselves a little bit of extra money, it's okay because they save lives, so they deserve it, right? Nope. Enjoy jail. Our next Reddit post is from Texas Kate. Backstory. Before I met my now husband, he was married and divorced. We'll call my husband Harry and his ex-wife Dana. Theirs was not a marriage of love, but a marriage of financial benefits. He was 19 and she was a little older. He was in college, but she couldn't afford to go. He was able to get grants and some small loans to afford college because his parents were dead broke. Her estranged father made too much money to qualify. So they got married. That way, the powers that be no longer considered her parents' income into her ability to pay part of the application for grants. He worked in commercial real estate and went to school part-time. With his income and both their grants and loans, she was able to go to school full-time and they graduated at the same time. They stayed together through and a little bit after college, and although they didn't really love each other, they did like each other. Harry started making a decent living and learned to appreciate the finer things in life. His upwardly mobile career allowed them to buy and sell their first house and then buy a second, nicer home. He also leased both of them brand new cars. In the year 2000, my husband started to feel like their time together had passed its prime, and she agreed. They started the divorce process, and since her job didn't pay her that much, he decided to give her 1. All the furnishings in their home, which he had paid for. 2. An agreement to finish out the remaining months on her very nice SUV's lease. 3. Half of his not inconsequential savings and retirement accounts, which was 100% funded by him. She had always spent all of her money on shoes and clothes, and she never opened or contributed to a savings account. He was very generous, considering our state wouldn't have forced him to pay alimony, only splitting up the assets. And he had come into the marriage with a small sum of savings that he never commingled and he could have kept. They were amicably divorced 90 days later, and they were both dating their future spouses within a few months of that. My husband and I started dating in early 2001. Only about 2 to 3 months after their divorce was final. A year and a half after the divorce, I moved in with my husband, and she married her extremely well-off financial boyfriend, Dana's screw-up. A few months later, my husband really wanted to make an upward job change which would significantly lower his income for a short time. He would be making $0 for at least 4 months, and then a slow but gradual increase in income, resulting in significantly more income after about a year and a half of ramp-up. My income could just barely cover all of our bills, my car payment and his car payment. But I didn't have enough to also cover his ex-wife's $500 a month car payment. He decided that since Dana was remarried, he shouldn't have to continue paying for that car, and he should be able to take the car back. That way, I could drive that car instead of buying a new car myself. He thought it was fair, and he read his divorce decrees, so he felt that it was possible. We consulted a lawyer who agreed that asking for the car back was fair. And although it wasn't written into the divorce decree as alimony, it would likely be treated as such if they ended up going to court, so he had a good chance of winning. Harry called Dana to explain the situation. He asked her for the SUV back, but she said no and ended the conversation. He called her a week later and asked again, stating that if she still refuses, he'll take her to court. She said that she had spoken to her husband and they were not going to give the car back. As an alternative, Harry asked if they could take over paying all, or at least some of the car payment, because the $500 a month would negatively impact his career advancements. They said they spoke to a lawyer and they refused to pay a penny of that car payment. So, on to the next option, courts. Our lawyer had laid out a plan for doing it without representation, so Harry went to the courthouse the next day and filed his complaint. A few days later, Dana called and said that she had been summoned by the court, and she and her husband wanted to come over and see if they could work something out without going to court. Great! We figured she had been seeing those $500 car payments were basically alimony, and she can't really have her ex-husband paying for her car now that she's remarried. She's seen the lights, but of course, this is r/Prorevenge, so we know better than that. The night she and her husband came over, their solution was not to give the car back. No, their solution was that my husband turn in the $500 per month vehicle, pay the early lease termination penalty, and get her a new 36-month lease on a different, cheaper car, say $250 a month. Considering there was almost 18 months left on his lease, this would actually cost him more money in the long run with that penalty, so this was a big no. She said, "Well, I talked to a lawyer, and he doesn't think that you have a snowball's chance in hell of winning in court." Harry said, "Okay, have a good night. Bye," and out they went, feeling like they won. The revenge. The court date came, and Harry showed up in court. Dana, nowhere to be seen. His case gets called up, and still no Dana. The judge reads the complaint, listens to Harry's story, and makes his judgments. The judge said, "I don't think my ruling would be any different had she showed up to court, but we'll never know. I hereby declare a default judgment in favor of the plaintiff." Once Harry received a printed copy of the judgment, he hatched his plan. First, he called Dee, told her that he won the case, and asked her for the keys. She said no and hung up on him. Second, he went to the dealership to order 2 new keys. He had the vehicle identification number and the car was his, so no problem there. Third, he knew where she worked and her schedule. He ordered a tow truck and requested a sheriff's officer at 3:45 for the next afternoon at her work. D-Day, 3:45 the next day. 15 minutes before she finished work, he met up with the tow truck driver and the officer in the parking lot of her work. The officer verified the documents, and they located the truck onto the flatbed. They moved the truck to the curb right outside the doors to Dana's work. A little after 4 p.m., Dana walks out, sees the trio and her car in the truck, and freezes in her tracks. "But you can't do that!" Harry hands her the official judgment, and the officer reiterates the court's judgment. "But I talked to Joe, and he said that you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning." Those were Joe's exact words. "Snowball's chance in hell." Harry thinks about it for a second, trying to figure out who Joe is. She had said it like he was supposed to know who Joe is. He tried to remember if there was a lawyer they both knew named Joe, but he could only think of their mortgage broker, Joe. Joe? Like our mortgage broker, Joe? Your lawyer is a mortgage broker? Yeah, he said that it wasn't written into the divorce decree as alimony, so you couldn't just take it because I got married. Harry said, "Well, the judge may or may not have agreed with you and Joe, but since you never showed up to court, you lost your opportunity to find out." Dana was left open-mouthed, catching flies. Harry took the officer's hand, thanked him for his time, said to the truck driver, "I'll meet you back at my house," said goodbye to Dana, and walked away. Just when Harry neared his car, she screamed, "How am I supposed to get home?" He replied, "Call that pansy of a man you call a husband who was okay with his wife's ex-husband supporting her." They got back to the house, unloaded the tow truck, and the driver was laughing his butt off. When he was finished, he said, "That was the best thing I've ever been a part of on this job." He ended up discounting the tow job by a bit, saying that's to make up for you having to be married to that entitled woman. I sold my SUV within a week, and I took over payments for his ex's car. Their divorce was no longer amicable, but we got married, had a kid, and lived happily ever after. Moral of the story? Pay for your own stuff, and don't no-show if you've been summoned to court, even if you think the plaintiff doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. Actually, especially if the plaintiff doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. Honestly, Dana deserved that. Not showing up to court, like, what did she expect to happen? Did she think that your husband was going to present her evidence and argue against his own case to be fair and balanced? What a doofus. Our next Reddit post is from Deleted. I was a member of a PHA sorority in college at a large Midwestern university. My group of friends and I weren't exactly the sorority type, but we had a really great time hanging out. Sorority life was pretty boring for the most part, until my junior year when the executive board consisted of all the girls that didn't like my friends and I. They didn't like that we went to townie bars, they didn't like that we were a little grungy, and they thought that we were a bad reflection on the group, but whatever. That year, I was more in trouble with our sorority board than I've ever been in my life. I was fined for wearing a denim jacket to the formal chapter under the no denim clothing rule that was meant to prevent girls from wearing jeans. I was fined for missing a chapter meeting to go to the hospital with a friend. They claimed that I wasn't excused because I wasn't the one who was injured or sick, even though I drove her. I was fined for drinking at formal, which was later taken back because I was over 21. It became pretty clear that they were trying to wear us down and make life so miserable that we would quit. The final straw came during our big charity event for the year. It's an all-night food event where we sell tickets and serve food to people on campus. We held it at the sorority house, and all the girls are required to work a 3-hour shift that evening. I went and did my shift early along with all the girls on the board. The early slot is really sought after because you can still go out and party that night. I did my shift and left to go do karaoke with my friends. The next day, I get an email saying the board wants to see me. They call me in and claim that they're going to fine me because they didn't see me working the event and that I skipped out. I tell them that I worked the first shift and that my friend who did signups can confirm that I signed in and worked the event. They claim that they don't trust my friend because they know that we're friends and they think that she's covering for me. In fact, they won't take any of my friend's word for it because they think that they'll lie for me. Then I tell them that I worked the same shift that they did and one of them had to have seen me there. Nope. I'm told they're going to recommend me for suspension for lying about my philanthropy hours among other issues I've had all semester. At this point, I'm pissed off. I'm in my apartment scrolling through Instagram when I see one of the girls in my sorority has posted a photo from the event where I'm clearly pictured in the background. Great! I take a screenshot and send it to the president of our chapter to prove that I was there. I get nothing back for a few minutes until suddenly I get a text from our president. I'm expecting an apology, but what I got back was so much better. She had screenshotted my texts and sent them back to me by mistake, thinking that she was sending them to someone else. In it, she was trashing me to who I can only assume she thought was the other board members, calling me a B-word and saying that it didn't matter because they would get me suspended for something else. Well, I said nothing and took screenshots of her message and immediately emailed them to our national office. I included all the BS fines I'd been hit with over the semester, the photos proving I was at the event they claimed that I didn't attend, and the awful texts that proved they'd been targeting me for months. I hear nothing further from our board about my looming suspension. Our next chapter meeting rolled around, and our president and vice president were nowhere to be found. Our national office sent in a few representatives and told everyone they were conducting interviews into some allegations about bullying and targeted harassment. The investigation ended up revealing that our board had created a list of undesirables that they had targeted and wanted kicked out or forced to quit. They even had a group chat where they planned out how they were going to get us kicked out or make us so miserable that we were going to quit. The shit hit the fan, and nearly our entire board got kicked out of the sorority. That was rSlash and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.